Namaskar, I'm Ashok Vyas, and in today's Inside Connect with Ashok Vyas, while we are monitoring the pulse of this great nation, America, we are also trying to see what additional proactive measures would prevent us from getting into these kind of situations where we not only lose innocent lives, we get into a situation which, to sum up, is very close to a kind of lawlessness, but it is also an expression of anger. How a civilized society should move forward in preventing innocent lives. Each life is important, definitely. And who else to help us navigate through the current scenario as well as share his vision for the better and harmonious world, especially in New York. I have the distinct pleasure and honor of welcoming someone who not only is serving as council member from District 31, he's also chair of the Public Safety Committee, and he has been working on one bill which becomes even more relevant today. So welcome, Richard Donovan ji. Namaste.
Thank you, brother.
And I'm also happy and thankful to our senior and dedicated member of Indian American community who has background of law as well as CPA, serving on various organizations, including being president of India Home, Mukhund Mehta ji. Mukhund ji, welcome. Namaste.
Namaste ji. Namaste ji.
So, while we are in very difficult circumstances in the sense that after the unfortunate killing of George Floyd, who police came at the killing of a shopkeeper, blaming that probably he was using a fake $20 currency, which later on was found to be not really fake. But it is a very painful scene when it moves back in your mind. You feel restless. How was it for you to learn about this, Sir Donovan?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure to be on ITV Gold. And, it was tough, because we've unfortunately been here before. Many of you may remember the death of Eric Garner, who was choked to death. And I literally just left Foley Square with his mom, who attended a press conference today because we introduced two pieces of legislation, which I'll get into a little later. But as a Black man in America, I lost my appetite for a few days. It was really it's been a rough period because we've not only been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, but then to see a Black man on the street accused of bringing in a $20 bill, being arrested for a low-level offense with an officer's knee literally on his neck as if he was an animal, as if his life did not matter, was just very painful. And it's been a very painful time in history for African Americans and people of color in general. All of our communities have been hit very hard by COVID-19, partly because we are the drivers of the city. So when you combine the two incidents, this is why we had this powder keg that was brewing tremendously on the ground, and that's what we've seen in the streets of New York City.
Mukundji, we don't know all the details in many cases. We make use of our imagination, we make use of what we know. And I know it's a very difficult question, but I just want you to think what might have led this police officer to behave the way he did.
Yes, thank you for having me here. I think the current case of George Floyd was a tipping point, in fact, because if you see in the recent past, Ahmaud Arbery case in Georgia, and then Louisville, Kentucky, case of another Taylor, and this was the third point in succession. So this is the amalgamation of the current events that has led to such a drastic situation in this country. And also, I think, as our council member, Honorable Richards said, that black people are treated not fairly. That is very right, because if you see in the area of employment, housing, healthcare, uh, in all this, there is always a low side on that part, and that really infuriates all the African Americans, that there is a racial inequality.
But it is unpardonable. There is no reason why anybody should behave with another human being the way we saw it on open street in daylight. Uh, so, your thoughts on the reason for this mindset still prevailing even among officers?
De-escalation training has been happening. The NYPD, like many departments, spends a lot of money on de-escalation training. And quite frankly, in Minnesota, one of the things they have over New York City, they're actually more transparent even around reporting mechanisms that they have, right? So this is a department that actually reports on chokeholds. And I think I heard today that 3/5 of all chokeholds used in that city, although the black community makes up very little, were of black people, right? Black and brown people. I always try to put myself in individual shoes. You know, I try to look at it from the standpoint and try to take a fair approach. And when you look at that specific incident, just like Eric Garner, where you had a police officer kneeling on this man's neck with his knee for nearly 9 minutes, and him saying he can't breathe, calling out for his mom. I mean, there's no training that could fix that issue. That's called being a human being. You know, if racism is embedded in some individuals, they'll treat people that way. And I believe that there certainly was some bias there. And there was clearly a reason why this officer felt he can do that. And part of it is he knew he could get away with it. He thought he could get away with it. And that's the problem rooted in law enforcement, is that we see these situations over and over. They transpire over and over again. But the problem is that even as that happens, there are no repercussions for those actions, for their actions. So accountability and transparency are two things that have to be central in moving this country forward and making sure that we really build bridges with law enforcement.
So law is there, and I want to understand, Mukundji, do you agree when council member says that he feels that the officer, that he can get away with it? Why should that impression be a part of their psyche?
I think, as Mr. Richards said about the accountability and the transparency, I fully agree with that one, because in New York, unless and until Section 50A of New York City civil rights law is changed, they are provided a little bit shield to the police officers. And regarding the transparency, I think there is a somewhat of they are given what you call it qualified immunity. That also protects the police officers. So I think there are some differences between the laws here and in other states. So unless and until, as Mr. Richards said, that accountability and the transparency are not improved, this situation may again repeat. And this is what happened even in the past in the big riots that took place, I think 1964 Watts riots. And also another thing was in 1992 when the verdict came out after the case. So I think unless and until some laws are changed, a protection of police officers should be rather modified.
If there is something which results into a kind of immunity for police officers, is that necessary? I mean, we need to find a balance. So based on your knowledge, and since you have closely worked on these issues as chair of the House of Public Safety.
Well, absolutely. And Mr. Mehta hit it right on the head. 50A, which is the state law that shields NYPD officers from public scrutiny. So right now in New York State, and this is one of the only states where police officers can hide their disciplinary records. So we all have a right to know who's policing our communities. So if there's an officer out there who's engaging in police brutality, the public should have a right to know. The media should have a right to know. And unfortunately, in New York State, we don't know because the state law has largely shielded them from scrutiny. So I was very happy to hear Governor Cuomo come out in support of repealing 50A and saying that the state legislature should certainly come up with the bill and send it his way so he could sign it into law. That's going to make a big difference. And then, today I talked about just briefly about my bill, which is to mandate the police commissioner to come up with something called the discipline matrix. Now, even in high school, right, Mr. Mehta, if I got in trouble, you got in trouble, you knew what your discipline was going to be. If you got into a fight, you knew that the principal could send you and suspend you for 5 days. In the NYPD, there's no criteria, there's no guidelines. Think about this. So if you go out there and you hit somebody upside the head or you ram your car into protesters, there's no disciplinary measures that are set for those officers. So today the speaker of the city council came out in support of my bill, including a bill sponsored by Rory Lansman, which would ban chokeholds that could be applied to people's necks, which we've seen in these cases kill people. So certainly there are things that the state and the city have to do better, and it all starts with transparency and ensuring that officers know that they're not above the law, that we all have to adhere to one law, and no one, whether you're in law enforcement or not, are above it.
So no one is above the law is very, what should I say, the basis for proper functioning of any civilized society. And indeed, protesting is also a part of one's democratic right. But how protests are designed makes a lot of difference, which affects innocent people as well as it affects the cause for which the protests are undertaken. So there are two sides to the situation where we are in right now. One, I would like both of you to look at it from the short term perspective, and another of course is long term. So we will talk about both, council member, but going towards the short term for now, the way protests have escalated in spite of the need to impose curfew after 11 p.m., whether it was in DC or whether it was in New York last night, we have seen the kind of looting that I don't remember having heard of in any other period in America, whether it is the flagship of Macy's in Manhattan or Nike or other stores. And Mukhund, what do you make out of it in the name of protest? Yeah.
Ashok, what I believe is that here there is a balancing is to be done between the constitutional independence or constitutional liberty versus protection of police and the public lives. So even the proper balancing is not done and is lopsided, then such a situation arises. When the mob, some people who come from outside the state, and according to the figures of those arrested, 1 out of 7 is a non-New Yorker. 15% of the people who have been arrested, they come from outside. So when they pelt the rocks and the bottles, then naturally police has to respond by having tear gas and batons and projectiles, such thing, paper spray, etc. So when there is a direct attack on the police, naturally they will enforce their power to a greater degree than what has been shown by the protesters.
Is governor expressing his disagreement about the handling of law and order situation by mayor, saying that mayor underestimates the scope of problem, and mayor has consistently denied the call for bringing in national guards. What do you have to say about these two things?
Well, I think we have to separate out the two things, and let's not get the message lost that there are a lot of peaceful protests happening around the city. And let me just remind people, anytime these situations arise, and this is not the first time, there are opportunists out there, and they're wrong. Because what happens is when you go out and loot, you discredit what we're marching for. I don't agree with people throwing Molotov cocktails at police officers. That is horrendous. That's not the way we meet our objective, as Brother Gandhi has taught us as well, in really reaching the goals that we're trying to do. So the two things we have to be focused on, or what does the budget of the city of New York look like, and what are our priorities in that budget? And then two, we have to be focused on policies and reforms. And there's a role for marching. Marching plays a role. The Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act came into light because people marched, people died. So those who loot are doing a disservice to everything that we are fighting for, and they should be held accountable. I would urge those who are doing it that we are out here marching for you and your children to make sure that your lives are better. And then you also have some factions of a lot of white anarchists who are out there setting the fires. Let's just call it what it is. It's not black folks setting the fires. It's white anarchists. And they have their own agenda. That's not our agenda. Our agenda is to ensure that we get the reforms and that we produce that righteous anger, because we do have a right to be angry, but we don't have a right. And those who are out there looting, they're doing a disservice to everything that we're fighting for. But I'll say this again, you will find opportunists in any situation, whether it's marching, whether it's politics, whether it's sports. Opportunism is something that's breeded in some individuals' DNA. They take advantage of situations. There's looting on Wall Street too. Let's remind people, they may not be burning down the streets, but they're certainly burning down everyday Americans' opportunities out of greed. So there's looting going on. It's just legal looting. So the thing is we have to ensure that we send that strong message to those who would be out there looting and doing a disservice to everything that we're trying to fight for during this moment.
So what argument council member has shared has its own validity, yet it doesn't give any sense of assurance to a common New Yorker that he would walk home safely if situations go out of hand. So while on any level we are in a position to justify the kind of unruly behavior, but the other point is also valid, where we take into account the situation in its totality. So Mukhund, as I was mentioning, there are two sides to it. One is short term. So in short term, when you have president talking about looting and shooting in the same phrase, it sends a message. And if you put that message with what we just heard from council member, it creates a volatile situation. So I'll have his comment, but before that, where lies the possible peaceful road ahead? And allow me to add, there we have seen many police officers showing their solidarity with people who are protesting. There are multiple images where you see them kneeling down and sometimes walking also with the protesters and saying that this is a parade. And so there have been very nice gestures on the part of police officers also. Yeah.
Oh, okay, you are very right that when the police acts in harmony with the protesters, the result is totally different. For example, in 2015, when the Freddie Gray's case came up, there was a somewhat of a reconciliatory tone by the police department. as against in 2014 in that Ferguson, Missouri case of Michael Brown. There was a completely different because that was of a something of a combative type approach taken by the police. So when the police acts as if they are a part of the society and not something beyond the society, then I think the result is definitely different and the people will calm down. But when you show your authority without any responsibility, then naturally it will backfire.
So, Council Member, I bring back to your attention the recent dialogues that we have heard through media between President and the governors of various states. So, President asking them to take a tough stand and dominate, etc. And then there are voices which say that this is not the right way of showing leadership, especially at such a critical phase for our nation. And I recollect with you Monday night, in spite of curfew, and by now we in New York have had 2,000 arrests, 700 were made yesterday itself, and today on Tuesday the curfew would begin from 8 p.m. So, what do you see is the way, uh, call that out, because we are still not totally away, as you mentioned in the beginning, from the threat of COVID-19, and then we have these mass protests. So we are kind of seeing potential simmering additional trouble emerging. What is the sane way to come out of it?
Well, let me just start with COVID-19. I mean, Black and brown communities have been impacted so much, and the city and the state were both slow in really getting testing done for our communities. I know I had a big debate with the mayor over that and finally got more testing in my community, which is the hardest hit in my community. There were no more people who died. There were no other communities that were hit harder through deaths than my community. The Rockaways was #1 in the city when it came to COVID deaths. So the thing is, we're dealing with that, and then you're dealing with this. And I don't think militarizing our streets is the answer. People have righteous anger, and we have to be able to let them come out and channel that energy and express it. You know, it's like a powder keg. You know, if you don't let people get out and express themselves, you're going to have a problem. And the curfew, as we saw last night, did very little.
Quick
right?
interruption, so that nobody misunderstands you. When you are advocating that people should have a right to express, you are in no way condoning the kind of looting that we have witnessed.
No. See, the looters are a small, minute amount of people that seem to have the media keeps focusing on. But for the thousands of people who marched in Brooklyn last night, it was peaceful. There was a march on Jamaica Avenue just this Sunday. It made the front of the Daily News 2 days ago, where my former inspector from the 101 precinct, who's now at the 103rd, and Inspector Tavallaro, took a knee with the crowd. So they are a lot more peaceful. There are protests happening now. It was a protest in Richmond Hill a little while ago. There are protests happening all over Queens, all over Brooklyn, and they're peaceful in large part. There are no people aren't burning stuff down and doing all these other things. So, you know, I just have to refocus it because the media seems to be focusing on a minute amount of people who are guilty of messing up the messaging of what we're fighting for at the moment. The curfew will do nothing because last night, as we saw with the curfew, people still marched through the streets of New York City with the curfew. And don't take my word for it, even from the police department. You know, my friends in the police department are like, well, how do we even enforce this? Are you going to stop everybody on the street? I mean, my dad's an essential worker. So he works in Manhattan. He gets off 11 o'clock. So is he going to be stopped every block he goes trying to get home? Is he going to have to show his ID? So it just creates more tension because the thing we should be trying to do is de-escalate right now. We should be trying to lower as much of the unnecessary police interactions with everyday New Yorkers as much as possible.
Allow me to interrupt you once again. Just we have 2-3 minutes, but I just wanted your thoughts on, you say military or
No, that's horrible. There's
No,
no need for it.
no, no,
Yeah,
no. You are saying
yeah.
that force won't help. So agreed. But now the kind of situation and instances that we have witnessed, there has to be a firm way to deal with that. So this is
Hmm.
not about protesters. This is about safety of New
Yeah,
York.
no, agree.
Yeah.
So, without a doubt, listen, 8,000 cops were shuffled out to Manhattan last night in Brooklyn. I think we have a very capable NYPD department who should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And we're going to have to be able to do that. But to have the military come in does not, it only heightens the situation. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire. So the thing is, we need to isolate those individuals who are setting fires. We need to isolate those individuals who are looting and make sure that they're held accountable. But I don't think doing a curfew does anything, especially when people are going to break it. They did it last night. They didn't set fires breaking it. You still had some looters, but the people marching through the streets still march through the streets. And I think it adds an unnecessary burden to the police department during this period, because you're now asking them, after they went through social distancing enforcement, which was horrible because we saw those disparities. Now you're asking them to go out into the streets and police people as well.
I deeply appreciate you helping us see this in the balanced way. And concluding remarks, what should be done on the part of all the parties related, so that we move towards a better, as we were already talking about new normal. Now this becomes an additional challenge to come to a balanced new normal. Uh,
Well, I'm a Democrat and running for Queensborough president, and I will be under that particular banner. So I'm hoping that I've done the work and earned the support of many of you out there. I think our record is very clear. There's no one who could debate our record or even close to having a record like ours and bringing home a lot of affordable housing, 5,000 units nearly to the district, over $1 billion in infrastructure money to Queens, over $500 million of investment to the Rockaways, a community that was hit very hard by Sandy, and making sure that our immigrant and undocumented communities can get the services that they need. I did some very early work to make sure the NYPD wasn't targeting and working very closely with ICE. We're going to open a welcome center in Queensborough Hall, by God's grace, when I'm elected, that will give us, especially undocumented individuals. My father just became a citizen last year, a one-stop shop where they can go and get services, so that we're reaching every pocket of Queens, the most diverse Mecca, not only in the state, but across the country. And we should celebrate our diversity. We have a lot of work to do to address the disparities in COVID-19, but we'll get through that together.
Absolutely, we should celebrate our diversity. And once again, not only I want to thank you, but I want to express my confidence in seeing you in the new position, council member. So, thank you very much. With lots of
Thank you.
praise for you, sir. Thank you. And
Thank you. Thank you.
thanks for joining us.
God bless. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
While I thank Council Member District 31, Richard Donovan, I also thank Mukhund Mehta ji, and I thank with lots and lots of good wishes to each one of you towards a better world. We move together and create that harmony which is sustainable with the depth of understanding and appreciation of each other. This is Ashok Vyas. Namaste.